Watch this.
Podré para mejorar mi español cuando no tengo mucho tiempo libre para estudiar español.
I'm Hamid, I'm 16 and fluent in Spanish and 3 other languages. And that after video you saw took 120 hours, which is equivalent to about 30 minutes a day for 4 months. Do you want to hear something crazy? There are some really weird rules about Spanish gender that even natives don't usually tell you about. So if you want to stop guessing and finally start speaking confidently, then this is exactly what you need to know. And if you make it to the end, then I have a free gift waiting for you. So what is gender in Spanish? So I remember the first time that I heard this thing about gender in Spanish, and it was in Spanish class. If you don't know, I'm born and raised in Sweden, and in Sweden in 6th grade you have to choose a language to learn as a third language in school. And so I chose Spanish, and in our first or second lesson, our Spanish teacher gave us this concept about genders in language, like that, words have genders. And at first, we were joking around oh, so certain words are boys or girls. And obviously it's not about that. But what it's really more akin to, and it's something that I realized later on, is that the idea of words having gender, or words, specifically nouns or things or objects, being separated into two categories is a concept that's used all the time, actually. And even in Swedish, we have, for example, en och ett, which is the equivalent of masculine and feminine, but in Swedish. And so I didn't realize it at first, but as I started studying Spanish and getting conversationally fluent, I realized that connection. And especially when I was getting fluent, there are a few rules, a few peculiar sort of parts about Spanish gender that has now helped me to stop guessing when it comes to getting the nouns in Spanish. Now, nouns are things, okay? So there are verbs, nouns, and adjectives. Those are the three most common types. And then there's also adverbs and all these other different things in grammar. No need to get into them. Nouns are things, objects. And the best way to think about nouns are words that you can put the or or un before of. That's the easiest way to think about it. Basically, if you can put the before the word, for example here, the story. Is the story cohesive? Yes. Therefore, the word story is a noun, okay? Or a story, right? Now, the reason why it's or un is because in English, we have the rule where you can't have two vowels directly after each other. So, for example, you wouldn't say a apple, you would say an apple. And so that is the practical way to find that out. On this channel, I just give you the practical, no BS, the simplest explanations for them. Same thing with verbs that I give. You can see other videos where I go through those. Now, in that Spanish class I was talking about, we obviously learned the very basic sort of well-known rules, okay? And so here's a sheet of those very common ones. So you can see the first most obvious one is that words ending in A will most commonly be feminine words, and words ending in O will most likely be masculine words. Okay, so that's the first one. Here gives us some examples. So the house, the face, etc. And so natives do tell you about this, but what they don't usually tell you is the actual reasoning behind it, okay? This is actually a framework I had to go through called the 3 W's, the what, the where, and the why. And the why, in my opinion, is one of the most important parts in language learning. And it's one of the biggest reasons why I was able to learn Spanish so much faster than the average sort of speed to learning a language. And so the reason why for this one is very obvious, okay? Words that end in A, historically known and in many different languages, words ending in A just directly cater to femininity, both in the sense of gender in real life, actual genders, man and woman, but also in words. So for example, the name Samantha sounds feminine, or the name, I don't know, Christina, right? And inversely, a name that ends in O, maybe. And one thing to keep in mind about genders in nouns in Spanish is this. In Spanish, it's not that thing is masculine or feminine. So it's not actually that the noun as the actual object is feminine, okay? But rather it's the word itself, okay? So the word for car can be, for example, carro, which is masculine, a masculine word, and máquina, which is a feminine word, la máquina. El carro, la máquina. Both of them are the same object. They refer to the same object, a car, right? But one word is masculine and the other one is feminine. So one crucial thing is that it's the word, not the noun, not the object itself. And this matters because when you look at how to identify which nouns are masculine or feminine, you look at the word, not the object, okay? So you look at the ending, for example, here. So here's another one. Words ending in sion or sion, depending on spelling, will most likely be feminine. So the word for presentation is presentación, it's most likely feminine. Song, canción, relation, etc. Okay? And words ending in ache or ahe will most likely be masculine. So like, for example, message, etc. And again, historical reasoning for this, words that end in sion, specifically words that end in Asian, will become asion. And this is because of Latin roots between English and Spanish. English is a Germanic language, and Spanish is a Latin language. I think around 75% of words from Spanish come from Latin. But we also know that English does have a lot of deep Latin roots. And you probably know that if you ever study English, specifically in the historical context. And so, because of that, you can transfer words from English to Spanish. And this is a concept called cognates. And one important thing about cognates is that most cognates are feminine words. So most cognates will have la as the, for example. Or the word for a will be una instead of un, right? I'll go through one more, and then we're going to go into some more specific ones. So another one is that words ending in dad or tad will most likely be feminine. So age, the truth, friendship, etc. So those will be feminine. And comparatively, words ending in or, so amor, dolor, etc., will most likely be masculine. And these are all just general rules, and this is just for the sake of not having to guess. It's easier to remember rules than it is to remember each individual word, which is why memorization isn't the way to go. Real quick before we move on, after years of developing these frameworks and over 100 hours of coaching, I've packed everything into one clear step-by-step program. So if you're serious about learning Spanish, then check the link in the description to join. Back to the video. So now let's talk about words ending in MA and the differences in these. So what I didn't show is that this is actually a smaller version of this chart that I found online. And I'm gonna expand it. And the reason why I didn't expand it is to show you this exact reason. And so you can see there's one more, which they call irregular. And this is a super interesting concept in Spanish. So here we can see words that end in O that are feminine words, which contradicts our first rule, right? And subsequently shows the opposite, which is that words that end in A that are feminine. Now here's the important part about these, because in Spanish, there are regularities within the irregularities. I'll say that again. There are regularities, patterns within the irregularities. And so, to explain some of these, okay? So for some words in Spanish, specifically I want to talk about these ma words, okay? M-A. So in Spanish, words ending in M-A, so not just A, but specifically M-A, will be masculine. And there's actually a really weird reason to this. You see, when I was learning about grammar and I used a course called language transfer, the apparent reason that this guy gave, who's like a linguist who studies language, is that the reason why these words that end in MA are masculine is because they come from Greek. And that in Greek, for some reason, those words are also masculine. And that reason seems very obscure and like, you know, such a random reason. But it matters because it gives you now a pattern. Any words that end in MA will be masculine. So here it shows, for example, weather, el clima, okay? Or idioma, which means language. And actually, idioma is connected to the word idiomatic, which means like linguistic. Like an idiomatic expression is an expression within a language. And you can see the connection there. I'm not sure if that connection is actually Latin. It probably is though. Or for example, the word for diagram is diagramma. So is that masculine or feminine? Masculine, because it ends in MA. What about the word for problem? Okay, this is a very normal one. The word for problem is problema. Is that masculine or feminine? Or masculine. El problema. And then here shows a poem, poema. Now, switching to the other side, showing these quote-unquote irregular ones, is, for example, la foto. So, photo is foto, yet the word for the photo is la. But there's also a reason for this one, because foto is actually a shortened version of a longer word. Think about it in English, okay? Photo is actually a shortened word. It's actually short for photograph. And photograph in Spanish is fotografía. And now you can see why it's la foto, because fotografía actually ends in A, and so therefore follows the basic rule. So even though it's irregular, it's not irregular because there are regularities within the irregularities. Now, obviously, Spanish will obviously have some irregularities here and there, okay? But the concept here is that there are so many instances where in Spanish there are whys, there are reasons behind the word that we don't take into account. And instead of learning those whys and saving time, we opt for memorizing them. And so this is a disadvantage. And here's why. The way I like to explain this is through a concept I like to call the 3 W's. And this framework is exactly how I teach my students Spanish, and it's also exactly how I learned Spanish myself. Most people find grammar extremely hard and excruciating, and it's because they don't do this exact framework, okay? Now, in any Spanish sentence, there's always two parts. There's the what the words are and where the words are placed, okay? Or everyone knows that it's, for example, me llamo, and it's me first, then llamo. Me llamo, right? Or me gusta, I like, right? Everyone knows the what and the where. And those are only two things that are needed to create the sentence. However, most people memorize the what and the where, and therefore it makes no sense. Most people will memorize stuff like el clima instead of understanding the why, like I just explained, for those words end in MA, for example. And this makes it not make sense. This leaves you in the most vulnerable position when it comes to learning. And that is memorization. Memorization is the most vulnerable position because it is basically just saying, memorize it. Just memorize it. And it is so much harder to learn with memorization than it is to make connections. And that's where we go to the next part. So everyone knows the what and the where with sentences. For example, como estás? But the reason why they struggle with grammar and, gender nouns, for example, or irregular conjugations is because they don't understand the why. Understanding the why is crucial, and this is the reason why. When you understand why things happen, then it makes more sense. And when it makes more sense, you remember it better. If you saw a pattern for how things are in a certain instance, whatever it is, right? Let's say it's math, let's say it's biology, okay? Or even wording, well, then you're going to remember it so much better than if you actually meticulously memorized each one. In fact, your brain automatically opts for understanding the why because your brain just wants to understand the why. Humans are logical creatures, and due to that, we want to find logic. And logic and why are basically the same thing. Understanding logic and understanding why behind a language is literally what humans are supposed to do because we want to find why. The student who asks why during the lessons is usually just a student. Think about that. Because if you were to build a building, would you ever build a building with a blueprint or would you rather just freewing it? Of course, you would want to have a framework, a blueprint, a logic, a why. Because not only can you then repeatedly make more buildings, but you can also know for sure that the building is correct. And that same logic applies. The building is Spanish sentences. And so understanding why behind anything to the furthest degree is the best way to really get it in your head. And of course, there's going to be times where I have to memorize it. The word for hand is mano, and the word for the hand is la mano. That one to me, maybe I haven't even dug deep enough, but that one to me just seems purely regular. But what you notice is there are so many words in Spanish that have logic to them. And this leads me to the gift that I was talking about. So if you check the description or the pinned comment, you can grab my free easy-to-use Cognate cheat sheet where you'll be able to learn thousands of Spanish words instantly using this exact concept of understanding the patterns, the why. And so if you like this video where I showed you the exact rules, you're going to love that cheat sheet. And it's literally free, no email needed, no opting in, literally just yours and free. Just as a thank you for reaching the end of this video. Otherwise, I'd really appreciate it if you shared this video with someone you think would benefit. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed and stay humble.